Welcome to SciTech Culture with Steve Kern and Ben Warner, where we examine science, technology and culture in the 21st century. Visit our website at scitechculture.com.
Hello everyone and welcome to SciTech Culture. My name is Ben Warner and I'm joined once again by my good friend and colleague Steve Kern. How are we today, Steve? We're going to talk about the mundane in a not so mundane place today.
Well, there's nothing mundane about it in space, especially when you need to go, you got to go.
Yeah, that's right. Well, just we'll focus on that one to begin with, but it kind of applies to a lot of mundane things in this area. So to give you the context, I actually, when I read this story about toilets on the ISS were reportedly broke down, and then there was like a breakdown of, well, if something like that does break down, that's actually a really significant problem in space. It's not like you can just call a plumber up and get it fixed, or head down to the nearest local public toilet. Maybe it's got to be thought of, and almost like a proper contingency planning event has to be taken care of in order to make sure the astronauts stay healthy, because it's not going to be good for them if they can't go. But the thing that kind of it got to me about this one, it sounded kind of funny, they spent 19 grand each per toilet from the sounds of things, and they broke down and whatnot, and they ended up with diapers, and then fortunately there was I think a shuttle sort of docked that they could pop in and out of the shuttle. But the thing that kind of highlights this to me, and we can sort of expand this out, not just from toilets, so we don't get stuck on any sort of toilet jokes throughout the app today, that the mundane can be quite challenging in an environment like that. And when you think about space and the way it's discussed, you hear a lot about, say, the dangers, the significant dangers of being in space. You hear about maybe the glamour of being in space, like the being able to see the vistas, walking on the moon. You hear a lot of that sort of stuff talked about a lot. Obviously, you don't hear about toilets breaking down, what happens when you sweat, how do you eat, what happens to your muscles when you're in a zero-G environment. All of that stuff, to me, is almost as fascinating, because it could potentially be just as bad as those dangers in space that they talk about, depressurization, or getting sucked out an airlock, or being exposed to space itself, etc. So I don't know. Did you find that when you're thinking about this, that it can be just as interesting a topic to cover, even though it doesn't? I don't know if it really is as much.
Yeah, well, I guess what you have to consider is that space is a hostile environment. Any off-world situation is a hostile environment. And life forms like ourselves aren't very well adapted to it. So effectively, you can't go out into space without a suit on. Otherwise, you'll end up like Arnie or whoever, and effectively you'll bloat. I don't think you'll explode, but I think the idea is you'll freeze and bloat simultaneously and die, of course.
Yeah.
In the vacuum. So we live off this world in basically tin cans that have to be able to do everything for us, and that's everything from clean the air that we breathe and recycle it, through to recycle our wastes. And at this stage, we have to take supplies of food with us. We can't generate any food in space.
Yeah.
And that part of actually, I think the future scientific research now is, how do you actually have a closed loop system in space that allows you to, start to create food sources in space. So, yeah, all the things we take for granted on Earth just simply aren't available in space, except in that little envelope, that little cocoon, whether it's a spaceship or a moon base. Everything's got to be accounted for, and that includes going to the toilet.
Yeah, exactly. So it's almost like you're having to almost create a mini Earth outside of Earth, because And that's the bit I think that can blow your mind in a way, and you take for granted what you have around you, is that there's a lot of components to, making us alive on this planet. And then when you go into an environment where none of those things are present, the sheer amount of, engineering required to, replicate that is astonishing. And it's actually quite a feat that they've been able to do it at all, even if, I guess you see those shots from the ISS where they're floating around and stuff. And I guess it's not the most attractive one-bedroom apartment that you can see, but at least it's functional.
Well, that's right. But I think there's some interesting things around this. So, every time the astronauts go to the toilet, and if it's a number one, I think they recycle about 80 or 85%. And actually turn it back into drinkable water. Okay. For the 15%, which should probably be the urea, what happens to that? Now, that's probably a very small percentage in terms of weight, but it's significant. That's something that's come up from Earth, and where does it go? And the same with your number twos. Up there, it costs about $25,000 to $30,000 a kilogram to put stuff in space. So for every kilogram of food you take up there, which probably is about, 4 days meals?
Yeah.
Maybe not even that. I don't know how much they actually eat in space. But 4 days meals, and next thing you're blasting it out back at the planet. Well, that's $25,000 literally going down the toilet every kilogram. Yeah. The idea would be that somewhere in the future that will have to be recycled into something.
Yeah.
Something functional. So it could be the hydrogen and oxygen that's available in there, or you could put it in a fermenter perhaps and turn it into more nutrition, whatever that would look and taste like. So I think these are some of the mundane challenges. I mean, we flush our stuff out, it goes to a plant, and then, it just sort of goes back into the ecosystem without much thought. But in space, you really need to get on top of that circular sort of closed loop systems. And going to the toilet is obviously one bit they haven't really worked out.
Well, at least they're keeping the astronauts alive with nutrients for that $25,000 or whatever a kilo. So, but
eight people on the space station. If they're even just having a kilogram each a week, it's that $200,000 just in meals.
Yeah, exactly. It's not the cheapest Uber Eats in history, is it? I just wanted to focus on a few other things too. Like I was doing some other reading. This idea that microgravity makes you taller. And I'm not sure if you can comment on this as well. I pulled this up at the last minute. Without gravity, fluids in your lower body partially migrate upwards, filling up not only your head but the discs in your spinal column. And you combine that with gravity not pulling on your spine. And this guy here was saying that he grew 5 centimeters in space, but then it gets, it comes back crashing down to Earth. When you get back down to Earth, and you go back to what you were before. That to me sounds like it could potentially cause some stress for the body as well that might be unintended. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't know. Like space medicine's still fairly new. They study it very closely, so there's no doubt you do get a little bit taller, I think, in space. But by the same token, you don't have the same forces on your body that gravity on Earth puts on it. So our bodies are obviously adapted for an Earth-like gravity. In space, that's different. And as you said earlier, there's all sorts of issues with that, around muscle wasting and, even down to sleep cycles, because there's no day and night in space. So how does your body clock, work? They look at these things quite closely. People have spent a lot of time in space, year in space continuously. So I would have thought that it's not that much of a hazard. I don't think too many astronauts have dropped dead early or ended up in wheelchairs, but you never know with these sorts of things.
Well, that's interesting that you mentioned the muscle mass thing again, and that you'd have to keep exercising while you're up there to maintain it. And then there's
you can't maintain it. Actually, you still waste.
Yeah.
Like So even they put them on pretty rigorous exercise regimes, but they all tend to get muscle wastage anyway.
But and I mean, apart from that being an issue, there's also something else that I was reading here about sweat having nowhere to go in space. So it sticks to you, it pulls on your arms and your head, can get into your eyes. If you're running, it can fling onto the walls, and then you have to go clean the walls. And it's just not something you would think about when you're running on the treadmill on Earth, kind of thing. It's fascinating.
Well, that's right. And I mean, part of the thing is that, and it probably doesn't quite apply to the sweat, although it would, is that there's no convection in space. So you need to have fans to move air. And in space also, the way water behaves in microgravity is different to the way it behaves on Earth, because as we know, you get a bead of sweat and it rolls down.
Yeah.
You know where it's going, and that doesn't happen in space either. So, and that's why you have these issues. I mean, God knows what happens for astronauts that sneeze in space. I've never heard anyone talk about that, but that must be a minor disaster.
The interesting you say that. On one of the points here, sneezing in a spacesuit is messy. You have to lean forward. You have to lean forward and sneeze into your chest to keep it from splattering on the visor.
Well, that's right. But what about in the space station? Millions of droplets just go
flying around everywhere.
Although perhaps they don't have a problem really sneezing in space.
Well, it's interesting because there was another point here saying that you rarely get sick on the space station because there's nowhere to catch a cold from.
That's right.
So the worst, like you get like a headache or you get injured or something, but not actually. But they also say here that, I guess this is a bit like the sneezing bit. You don't want to be throwing up either, because interesting because the vomit bounces back off the other side of the bath bag into your face. So that can't be good.
That's awful. Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe they better develop a better bath bag. I guess the other thing is, getting back to this close system thing, is that the oxygen is scrubbed by heavily alkaline solutions in space. They do say that the potential for growing plants up there would be good for the mental health of the astronauts, as well as actually helping scrub the air. So these sorts of things, as I say, we take for granted on Earth, but they're all big problems up there.
Yeah.
I mean, if you are sick, what do you do with it? You should be able to recycle it.
Yeah, exactly.
Same with a sneeze. That's all good moisture.
Yeah, exactly. I guess just to finish up on, and just one of the other points that they make, all of this is, I guess, worth it because the views and what you can see and experience up there is completely and totally amazing and literally out of this world. So, and one of the things that one of the astronauts mentions here in this article is about spacewalking and how magnificent it is to step out for the first time by yourself. Black on one side, the Earth on the other, and there's nothing. I guess the station's there or the shuttle's there, I guess, but you can sort of turn away from it and you just have this sort of never-ending vista that you would never see. And also, you also feel the privilege of being one of very few humans that have seen it or will see it, depending on, I guess, how many any of us end up there, of course, in the future.
Well, it must be simply amazing. It really must. And on that, though, I've heard it reputably said that by 2030 there will be hotels in space. So you would imagine that probably by about 2050, it's not going to be too much trouble to get yourself a ticket into space.
Well, on that note, we better hope that they get that closed loop opening sooner rather than later. All right, Steve, we might wrap it up there. So don't forget to check out our website, scitechculture.com. You can get all of our links and content there. You can subscribe to our RSS feeds, YouTube and Vimeo channels, and we have all our blogs, etc. on the website. So we greatly appreciate your visit there. All right, so that's it for this episode. We'll catch you next time.